Hello, everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
A stranger at sunrise. Have you ever felt that your English would never be good enough? Have you ever watched other people speak with confidence while you stayed silent because you were afraid of making one tiny mistake? If that feeling has followed you for years, stay with me, because today's slow English story might change more than your vocabulary. It might change the way you see yourself. This is the true story of how helping one new immigrant on an ordinary American morning unexpectedly changed my family, my marriage, my confidence, and perhaps someone else's entire future. Sometimes the smallest conversation becomes the biggest turning point. The morning began like hundreds of other mornings in my neighborhood outside Seattle. The air was cool. The sky was soft gray. Birds were singing above the tall maple trees while people hurried toward work carrying coffee cups almost as carefully as they carried their dreams. America can feel exciting, but it can also feel incredibly lonely. Millions of people arrive every year hoping for a better future, only to discover that the hardest part is not finding a job. It is finding someone willing to slow down long enough to listen. I had just finished my morning walk when I noticed a young woman standing near the city bus stop. She looked lost. Not the kind of lost that a phone map could fix. She was holding a small backpack, a folder full of documents, and a folded bus schedule that she kept opening and closing every few seconds. She looked at every passing bus with hope, then watched it leave with disappointment. I almost kept walking. Maybe someone else would help her. Maybe she was waiting for a friend. Maybe she did not want to be bothered. Those are the little excuses our brains create every day. They sound reasonable. They sound safe. But sometimes they quietly steal the opportunity to change a life. Then our eyes met. She smiled politely, but I could immediately recognize the expression behind the smile. I had seen it years ago when my own family first moved across the country. It was the smile people wear when they do not understand what is happening but are too embarrassed to ask again.
I walked over slowly.
Good morning. She answered carefully. Good morning. Her pronunciation was gentle, slow, careful. Every word seemed to carry extra weight. My name is Daniel, I said. She paused before answering. My name, Sophia. Her English was simple, but it was enough. Sometimes enough is exactly where confidence begins. Scientists studying language learning have found that people remember new vocabulary much more effectively when it is connected to emotion instead of memorization alone. That means a friendly conversation often teaches more than an hour of silent study. I did not know that research would become real in front of my eyes only a few minutes later. Sophia unfolded the bus schedule again. I new here. I arrived yesterday. I need office. She pointed toward an address printed on one of her papers. I smiled. I know that place. Her shoulders relaxed immediately. It was amazing how for simple words could remove so much fear. As we started walking together, I spoke slowly on purpose. This is a bus stop. This bus goes downtown. That street is Main Street. No expense, of course. No grammar test. Just two people walking through an ordinary American neighborhood while English became part of real life instead of another difficult subject. The sidewalks slowly became busier. Parents pushed strollers. Students carried backpacks. Construction workers laughed beside a food truck selling breakfast sandwiches. The smell of fresh coffee floated through the cool air. Everything looked completely normal to me. Everything looked completely new to Sophia. She stopped walking for a moment. So beautiful. I looked around. It was just another Tuesday morning. Then I realized something important. Sometimes we stop appreciating the life we already have because we see it every day. Someone seeing it for the first time reminds us that ordinary moments can actually be extraordinary. As we reached the crosswalk, the traffic light changed. Cars stopped. People crossed together. Sophia looked surprised. So many cars stop. I laughed softly.
Yes.
Most drivers stop for people here. She nodded thoughtfully. Small cultural differences often become the first English lessons. You do not only learn new words. You learn new habits, new expectations, and new ways of understanding the world. While we waited for the next bus, Sophia quietly told me why she had come to America. Her husband had arrived 6 months earlier to work in healthcare. Their little daughter would join them after school finished back home. They dreamed about buying a small house someday. Nothing luxurious. Just a safe place with a backyard where their daughter could play without worry. As she spoke, I noticed something. Her grammar was not perfect. Her vocabulary was small. But her hope was perfectly clear. Hope rarely needs complicated sentences. The bus finally appeared around the corner. She looked nervous again. What if I say wrong? I smiled. You don't need perfect English. You need courage. She looked at me silently for a few seconds before smiling wider than she had all morning. The bus doors opened. She took one deep breath. Then she stepped forward. At that moment, neither of us realized that this simple ride would become the beginning of a friendship that would eventually bring our families together, test our hearts in unexpected ways, and prove that sometimes helping one new immigrant today becomes the first chapter in someone else's beautiful American story. First words, first smile. The strange thing about learning English is that your biggest battle is usually not with grammar. It is with fear. Fear whispers that everyone is judging your accent. Fear tells you that one wrong word will make people laugh. But on that bus ride across a quiet American morning, I watched fear lose its grip one simple sentence at a time. And I had no idea that before the day ended, Sophia would say something that would remind me why kindness is still one of the most powerful languages in the world. We stepped onto the city bus together, and Sophia immediately looked overwhelmed. The driver greeted every passenger with a cheerful smile, but when it was her turn, she froze. Her fingers tightened around the bus card. Her eyes searched the floor as if the right English words might suddenly appear there. I quietly smiled and whispered, "Just say, good morning." She took a slow breath. "Good morning." The driver smiled even wider. "Good morning. Welcome aboard." That was it. 5 simple words. No difficult grammar. No perfect pronunciation. Yet I could almost see her confidence grow by one tiny inch. Psychology researchers often explain that our brains remember successful experiences much longer than we expect. Every small victory creates evidence that says, maybe I can do this. That morning, Sophia collected her first piece of evidence. We found 2 empty seats near the window. Outside, downtown Seattle slowly came alive. Office workers hurried across intersections carrying coffee cups larger than sunflower pots. Cyclists moved between traffic with practiced confidence. Street musicians unpacked guitars while food trucks filled the air with the smell of fresh breakfast burritos and warm cinnamon rolls. Sophia watched everything with wide eyes. America, busy. I laughed softly. Yes, very busy. She repeated after me. Very busy. Then she looked outside again. But, beautiful. I nodded. Beautiful and busy. She smiled and repeated both words several times. That is something language teachers often encourage. Repeating meaningful words in real situations helps the brain connect vocabulary with emotion. Instead of memorizing a list inside a textbook, your mind builds living memories. The bus stopped several times. More passengers climbed aboard. An elderly man sat across from us. He noticed Sophia studying the route map and smiled kindly. "First week here?" he asked. Sophia looked nervous again. She understood only 2 words.
First.
Here. She looked toward me. I quietly encouraged her. "You can answer." She hesitated before speaking. "Yesterday." The man smiled warmly. "Well, welcome to America." Sophia understood 1 word immediately. Welcome. She smiled so brightly that even the man laughed. Sometimes 1 familiar word can feel like finding a lighthouse during a storm. After a few minutes, Sophia turned toward me with curiosity. "People. Friendly?" I thought carefully before answering. Some people are. Some people are busy. Some people are having a bad day. But if you smile first, many people smile back. She quietly repeated, "Smile first." That sentence seemed to stay with her. As the bus rolled through downtown, we passed parks, apartment buildings, bookstores, public libraries, schools, and small family-owned restaurants. I explained everything slowly. This is a library. People borrow books here. That is a grocery store. Families buy food there. She repeated every sentence with patience. There was no pressure, no race, just slow English spoken naturally, exactly the way real conversations happen every day across America. Modern neuroscience suggests that relaxed learning environments improve memory because stress reduces the brain's ability to absorb new information. In other words, the calmer you feel, the faster you often learn. Looking at Sophia, I realized something surprising. Maybe I was learning as much as she was. I had forgotten how magical ordinary words could sound to someone hearing them in real life for the first time. Several passengers immediately stood up and changed buses. Sophia looked frightened. "Wrong bus," she whispered. I smiled reassuringly.
No.
"Same bus. Different road." She let out a long breath. America. Surprise every day. We both laughed. Unexpected situations often create the best English practice because real life never follows the script. A few minutes later, we finally arrived near the immigration support office. Before walking inside, Sophia stood silently in front of the building. She looked at the large American flag moving gently in the morning wind. Then she looked at the people entering with folders, backpacks, children, and hopeful faces. Some looked nervous. Others looked excited. Every person carried a different story. Every story had the same beginning. A chance. Sophia suddenly turned toward me. "Can I ask?" "Of course." "Why? Help me?" For a second, I did not answer. The truth was surprisingly simple. Because years ago, someone helped me when I felt lost too. She stared at me with quiet surprise. "Really? Really?" She smiled, and this smile was completely different from the first one I had seen at the bus stop. The first smile had been polite. This one carried trust. As we walked toward the entrance together, neither of us noticed the little girl sitting inside the waiting room coloring pictures beside her mother. Within an hour, that little girl would unexpectedly connect our 2 families in a way neither of us could possibly imagine. And the story that had begun with 2 strangers at a bus stop was about to become something much bigger than either of us had planned. Coffee and new hope. Most people think the hardest part of moving to America is finding an apartment or getting a job. I used to think that too. But after that morning with Sophia, I started to believe the hardest part is much quieter. It is walking into a room full of strangers and wondering if anyone will remember your name tomorrow. And just when I thought our story would end with a simple bus ride and a polite goodbye, a little girl in a waiting room looked up from her coloring book and changed everything. Inside the immigration support office, the atmosphere was a strange mix of hope and anxiety.
Vonnisgang.
Numbers flashed on a screen. People filled out forms while whispering questions in many different languages. Some looked excited. Others looked exhausted. A few looked as if they had not slept in days. Sophia checked in at the front desk, and we sat down to wait. That was when the little girl noticed us. She could not have been older than 6. She had curly dark hair, pink sneakers, and a coloring book spread across 3 chairs like it was the most important project in America. She stared at Sophia for a moment, then held up a crayon. "Do you like purple?" she asked. Sophia blinked, surprised. "Purple?" The girl nodded seriously. "It's the best color." Sophia laughed softly.
Yes.
"I like purple." The girl immediately scooted closer and showed her a page filled with crooked flowers and a giant smiling sun. Children have a remarkable ability to ignore the invisible walls that adults build around themselves. They do not care about accents, immigration status, or perfect grammar. They care about whether you like purple. While the little girl colored, Sophia quietly practiced English with me. "I am new here. I arrived yesterday. I am learning English." She repeated each sentence carefully, sometimes smiling when she got a word right. Language learning researchers often talk about something called comprehensible input, hearing language that is slightly above your current level but still understandable. That morning, our conversation was exactly that, simple, real, and connected to the moment.
No complicated lessons.
Just English that had a purpose. After about an hour, Sophia finished her appointment. She looked relieved, though still tired. "Many papers," she said with a dramatic sigh. I laughed. "Welcome to American paperwork." She laughed too, and it was the first time I heard a completely relaxed laugh from her. Before leaving, the little girl ran over and handed Sophia a purple crayon.
For your new home, she said.
Sophia looked genuinely touched. "Thank you." Her voice became softer. Very kind. Outside the office, the afternoon sun had finally broken through the clouds. The city looked warmer, brighter, almost friendlier than it had in the morning. I was about to say goodbye when Sophia hesitated. "Can I ask one more thing?" "Of course." "Good coffee. Where?" I laughed. Now that's an important American question. We walked to a small neighborhood cafe a few blocks away. It was the kind of place with mismatched chairs, local artwork on the walls, and a chalkboard menu that somehow made every drink sound life-changing. The smell of roasted coffee beans filled the room. Sophia looked around with curiosity. "So many people work here?" Half the customers were typing on laptops. "Yes," I said. In America, coffee shops are sometimes offices, classrooms, meeting rooms, and therapy sessions all at once. She laughed again. We ordered slowly, so she could practice. "1 coffee, please. Small size." "Thank you." The cashier understood her perfectly. Sophia looked almost shocked. He understood me. Of course he did. She stared at her coffee cup for a second. I thought my English was too bad. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. So many language learners believe they must sound perfect before they deserve to speak. But communication is not a performance. It is a bridge. A bridge does not need to be beautiful. It just needs to help people cross. We sat by the window while the city moved around us. Sophia told me more about her life. Her husband worked long shifts at a hospital. They had saved money for years to move to the United States. Their daughter, Emma, would arrive in 2 months after finishing school back home. "She is excited," Sophia said. "She wants yellow bicycle." I smiled. That sounds very specific. "Yes," Sophia laughed. "Not red. Not blue. Yellow." For a moment, she looked out the window quietly. Then she admitted something she had not said before. "I am happy, but also scared." I nodded. Both can be true at the same time. She looked relieved that I understood. Psychologists often say major life changes create mixed emotions because the brain treats uncertainty as both opportunity and danger. That is why people can feel grateful and terrified simultaneously. Sophia was living inside that exact contradiction. As we finished our coffee, she looked at me and asked a question I did not expect. Would your family like to meet us someday? I smiled. I think they would. Neither of us knew that this simple invitation would lead to dinners, birthdays, school events, and a friendship that would eventually feel more like family than friendship. And neither of us knew that before Emma even arrived in America, a surprising phone call would force Sophia to choose between giving up on her dream or fighting for it in a way that would test every ounce of courage she had just begun to find. Home beyond borders. There is a moment in every new friendship when you stop being polite strangers and begin becoming part of each other's lives. Sometimes it happens after years. Sometimes it happens over a simple dinner invitation. I thought I was only inviting Sophia and her husband to meet my family for one relaxing evening, but before the night was over, an unexpected phone call would remind all of us that building a new life in America is never a straight road. It twists, surprises, and occasionally asks one difficult question. When life becomes uncertain, who will stand beside you? Saturday arrived with bright blue skies and the kind of comfortable summer weather that makes neighborhoods across America feel alive. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalks. Neighbors trimmed their gardens. The smell of grilled hamburgers floated through the air from nearby backyards. My wife, Emily, had spent the entire morning preparing dinner. She believed that food was often the fastest way to make strangers feel like family. People remember kindness, she always said, but they remember kindness with homemade food even longer. Our 2 children could hardly wait for our guests to arrive. They had cleaned the living room twice, arranged board games on the coffee table, and even argued over which homemade cookies looked the nicest. They were more excited than nervous, something adults often forget how to be. Around 4 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and found Sophia standing beside her husband, Miguel. He was tall, friendly, and looked exhausted in the familiar way that healthcare workers often do after long hospital shifts. He smiled warmly and shook my hand. Thank you for inviting us. His English was stronger than Sophia's, but he still spoke carefully, choosing each word with intention. Emily welcomed them inside with a smile that immediately made the house feel warmer. Please come in. Your family tonight. Sophia looked surprised by those words. Family tonight. Sometimes the simplest expressions carry the deepest meaning. Around the dining table, conversations began slowly. We talked about weather first because almost everyone can talk about weather. Then we moved to food, neighborhoods, schools, and eventually the funny differences between daily life in America and the countries where Sophia and Miguel had grown up. Miguel laughed when he admitted he was still confused by the enormous grocery stores. Back home, he said, I bought milk in 5 minutes. Here I spend 15 minutes choosing between 20 kinds of milk. Everyone laughed. Emily nodded. Honestly, I still get confused too. That small joke broke whatever nervousness remained. Research in social psychology suggests that shared laughter lowers emotional barriers and helps people build trust much faster than formal conversation. Sitting around that table, I could almost watch that theory come to life. Soon our children were asking Sophia dozens of curious questions. What's your favorite American food? Have you seen snow before? What color will Emma paint her room? Sophia answered slowly, smiling after every sentence. She paused sometimes to search for the right word, but nobody interrupted or corrected her. That mattered more than she probably realized. One of the greatest gifts you can give someone learning English is patience. Fluency grows faster in places where people feel safe enough to make mistakes. Dinner itself became another English lesson without anyone planning it. Emily pointed to each dish as she served it. Mashed potatoes, roasted chicken, green beans. Sophia repeated each phrase quietly before taking a bite. Delicious, she said confidently. Very delicious. My daughter smiled proudly. Mom made the potatoes. Sophia turned toward Emily. You cook with love. The room became quiet for a second. Emily smiled warmly. Thank you. That's the nicest compliment I've heard all week. Sometimes imperfect English creates the most perfect sentences because they come directly from the heart. After dinner, we stepped into the backyard where the children chased bubbles across the grass while the adults relaxed with lemonade. Sophia watched them laughing and whispered, I cannot wait for Emma to come. There was excitement in her voice, but also worry. Any parent could hear both emotions at once. She'll love it here, Emily said gently. Kids make friends faster than adults. Sophia nodded, although I could tell she was still thinking about the thousands of little challenges waiting ahead. New school, new language, new culture, new friends. It was a lot for one little girl. As the sun slowly began to set, Miguel's phone suddenly rang. He looked at the screen, and his smile disappeared almost instantly. He answered quietly and listened without saying much. Sophia watched his face carefully. Something was wrong. After a long silence, he ended the call and took a slow breath. The hospital changed my schedule again, he said softly. They need me to work nights for the next few months. Sophia looked shocked. But Emma comes soon.
Miguel nodded.
I know. The backyard suddenly felt much quieter. Working nights meant he might barely see his family. It also meant Sophia would face many of her first months in America alone while continuing to learn English, prepare for Emma's arrival, and adjust to a completely new life. It was the kind of unexpected challenge that many immigrant families quietly face behind closed doors. Nobody complains because survival leaves little time for complaining. Emily gently placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder. You're not alone anymore. Sophia looked up surprised. Emily continued, when Emma arrives, we'll help.
School. Shopping.
Anything you need. I nodded immediately. Absolutely. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of fear. They were tears of relief. Hope often arrives quietly. Sometimes it sounds like 4 ordinary words. You're not alone anymore. As our guests prepared to leave, my son handed Sophia a small drawing he had made during dinner. It showed 2 houses connected by a bridge with smiling stick figures standing in the middle. At the top he had written, in careful handwriting, neighbors become family. Sophia held the picture against her chest, as if it were something priceless. None of us realized that only a few weeks later, when Emma finally arrived in America, that little bridge drawn in crayon would become far more than a child's picture. It would become the symbol of a promise that all of us would soon have to keep in ways we never expected. Love speaks slowly. People often ask what the fastest way to learn English is. They expect me to mention grammar books, language apps, or expensive courses. But after watching Sophia's journey, my answer became surprisingly simple. The fastest way to learn a language is to care about the people speaking it. When your heart wants to connect, your mind suddenly finds the courage to speak. That lesson became clear the afternoon Emma finally arrived in America, carrying one small yellow suitcase, one stuffed rabbit, and a smile that somehow made our entire neighborhood feel brighter. I still remember standing with my family at the airport arrivals area. Travelers hurried in every direction, rolling suitcases across shiny floors while excited families searched every face coming through the sliding doors. Sophia looked nervous again, just as she had on the morning we first met at the bus stop. She kept checking the arrival screen every few seconds, twisting her wedding ring whenever she felt anxious. Miguel had finished another overnight hospital shift only 2 hours earlier, but he insisted on being there despite his tired eyes. Then the doors opened. A little girl wearing a bright yellow backpack spotted her parents and shouted, "Mom!"
Dad.
Before anyone could react, Emma ran across the terminal as fast as her little legs could carry her. Sophia dropped to her knees and wrapped both arms around her daughter. Miguel joined the hug a second later, and for a moment the busy airport disappeared. It was just one family together again. My wife Emily quietly smiled beside me. "That's what hope looks like," she whispered. I could not disagree. Emma soon noticed my children standing nearby. She looked shy for exactly 5 seconds. Then she pointed at my son and asked, "Do you like soccer?" He laughed. "I love soccer." That was enough. Within minutes they were talking as if they had known each other for years. Children rarely wait for perfect communication. They simply decide to become friends. During the drive home, Emma sat in the back seat beside my daughter. She looked out the window with endless curiosity. So many trees. So many cars. So many big houses. Every few minutes, she asked another question. Do squirrels really live everywhere? Why are the roads so wide? Does it snow here? Each answer became another tiny English lesson wrapped inside a real conversation. Educational psychologists often explain that curiosity activates deeper learning because the brain naturally remembers information connected to genuine interest. Emma was not studying English. She was discovering a new world, and English simply became the key that unlocked it. A few days later, Emily invited Sophia and Emma over for lunch while Miguel slept after another night shift. The children played in the backyard while the adults prepared sandwiches in the kitchen. Sophia carefully watched Emily cook. "Americans eat many sandwiches," she joked. Emily laughed. "More than we probably should." Sophia smiled before asking something more personal. "How long? Married?" 14 years. Emily answered proudly. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "Secret?" Emily paused for a moment before replying. "We don't try to win every argument. We try to understand each other before proving we're right." Sophia repeated the sentence slowly, almost as if she wanted to remember every word forever. Understand. Before. Proving right. She smiled. Beautiful. I happened to walk into the kitchen just as that conversation ended. Sophia looked at me. English has many words. She gently placed a hand over her heart. But love. Maybe speak slowly. Emily looked at me and quietly smiled. Neither of us said anything because we both understood exactly what Sophia meant. Love is rarely measured by complicated vocabulary. It is measured by patience, kindness, listening, and showing up when someone needs you most. Scientific studies on healthy relationships consistently show that active listening strengthens emotional bonds far more than constantly giving advice. People do not always need solutions. Sometimes they simply need someone willing to hear them completely. Looking back, I realized our English conversations had followed that same principle from the very beginning. We spoke slowly. We listened carefully. Nobody rushed anyone. Maybe that was why every conversation felt meaningful instead of stressful. Later that afternoon, Emma asked my daughter if they could ride bicycles around the neighborhood. Emily smiled. Of course. Emma stopped and looked uncertain. I don't know all the words. My daughter answered with a grin. That's okay. We can learn together. Off they went, laughing as they practiced simple English while pointing at trees, birds, flowers, sidewalks, mailboxes. and friendly neighbors walking their dogs. Every object became a new vocabulary word. Every laugh became another reason not to fear making mistakes. Watching them disappear around the corner reminded me that language grows naturally when it becomes part of daily life instead of a constant test. As the evening sun painted the sky orange, Sophia quietly thanked us again. "You help my family feel home." I smiled. "One day you'll do the same for someone else." She looked surprised by the idea. "Maybe." "No," I said gently. "I'm sure." She laughed softly, but I could tell she was thinking about it. None of us knew how quickly that prediction would come true. Because only a few days later, during Emma's very first week at her new American school, another frightened newcomer would walk through the classroom door, and this time it would not be me offering the first smile. It would be Sophia, discovering that the greatest proof you truly belong is the moment you help someone else believe that they belong too. A difficult day together. Life has an interesting habit of testing your confidence just when you finally begin to believe in yourself. Have you ever noticed that? You practice something for weeks, you feel stronger than ever, and then one unexpected problem appears and whispers, "Maybe you were never ready after all." That was exactly what happened to Sophia. She had started smiling more. She spoke simple English without freezing. Emma was adjusting to her new school. Miguel was slowly getting used to his demanding night shifts at the hospital. For the first time since arriving in America, their future seemed brighter than their fears. Then, on a cool Tuesday morning, my phone rang before breakfast, and I immediately knew something was wrong. Sophia rarely called without sending a text first. I answered quickly. Her voice sounded calm, but I could hear the worry hiding underneath. "Daniel." "I need help." "Of course. What happened?" There was a short pause. "I received a letter." "I don't understand." 20 minutes later, I arrived at their apartment carrying 2 cups of coffee. Sophia opened the door holding an official envelope in one hand and a dictionary in the other. Emma was already at school, and Miguel had just gone to bed after another overnight shift. The apartment was unusually quiet. Sophia handed me the letter. It explained that several immigration documents needed additional verification before the next appointment. The language was polite, but filled with complicated legal vocabulary that would confuse many native English speakers, let alone someone who had arrived only weeks earlier. Sophia looked at me nervously. Did I do something wrong? I shook my head immediately.
No.
This happens more often than people think. She slowly sat down at the kitchen table. But what if I miss something? That question carried much more than paperwork. It carried every fear she had been trying to hide since arriving in America. Fear of making a mistake. Fear of disappointing her family. Fear of losing the future they had sacrificed so much to build. According to psychologists who study stress, uncertainty often feels heavier than bad news because the human brain naturally imagines worst-case scenarios when important information is missing. Looking at Sophia, I realized she was not afraid of the letter itself. She was afraid of everything her imagination was adding to it. We spread the documents across the table and went through them one page at a time. I explained every sentence using simple English. This means they need another copy. This is only a reminder. This is your appointment date. Sophia repeated each explanation quietly before writing short notes beside the paragraphs. Her confidence slowly returned as the confusing words became understandable. Language has an incredible power. When you understand the words, you often discover that the problem is much smaller than your fear first suggested. After about an hour, Sophia smiled for the first time that morning. Not impossible. I smiled back. Never impossible. Just confusing. She laughed. America has many confusing papers. That's true. I admitted. Even Americans say that. The laughter broke the tension. We finished organizing every document into neat folders, each labeled with simple handwritten notes that Sophia could easily recognize. Then another surprise arrived. Miguel woke up earlier than expected and walked into the kitchen looking exhausted. He carried his phone with a worried expression. "The hospital called," he said quietly. "They're asking if I can work extra shifts this month." Sophia immediately looked disappointed, although she tried not to show it. More night shifts meant even less family time. Emma had just begun making friends at school, and Sophia was still learning how to manage daily life in English. They had been hoping things would finally become easier. Instead, life was asking for even more patience. I watched Miguel carefully. He looked torn between supporting his family financially and simply being present with them. Modern family researchers often point out that immigrant families experience unique pressures because every important decision affects not only money, but also emotional stability, language learning, education, and long-term opportunities. There are rarely perfect choices, only difficult ones. Emily arrived a little later with homemade vegetable soup and fresh bread. She somehow always knew when comfort mattered more than advice. As we ate lunch together, the conversation slowly shifted away from paperwork and work schedules. Emma came home from school carrying a colorful drawing. She proudly placed it on the table. It showed 4 people holding hands beneath a bright blue sky. "This is my family," she explained. Then she added 2 more stick figures. "And this is Daniel and Emily." Sophia looked surprised. "Why us?" Emma answered without hesitation. "Because family helps family." The room became completely silent. Children often understand truths that adults spend years trying to explain. Emily smiled warmly. "I think she's right." Sophia quietly wiped away a tear. Back home, family lived close. She looked around the table. "Maybe family can grow." I nodded. Sometimes the best families are built, not just born. That afternoon, instead of worrying alone, we drove together to the community support center to submit the missing documents. This time Sophia walked inside confidently. She greeted the receptionist with a smile. She asked questions when she needed clarification. She even thanked the staff before leaving. The same woman who had once been afraid to say good morning on a city bus was now handling official conversations with quiet confidence. Progress rarely arrives all at once. It arrives sentence by sentence, conversation by conversation, day by day. As we walked back toward the parking lot, Sophia looked up at the bright afternoon sky and laughed softly. "Today started scary." "Yes," I agreed. "But it didn't end scary." She smiled. "Because I wasn't alone." Those words stayed with me all evening. Yet none of us knew that the greatest test of Sophia's growing confidence was still waiting. Only a few days later, Emma would come home from school worried about another new student sitting alone during lunch, and for the very first time, Sophia would have the chance to become the helper instead of the one asking for help. Small wins matter. Most people never notice the exact moment when their life begins to change. They expect fireworks, dramatic speeches, or one unforgettable day that separates the old life from the new one. But real change rarely arrives that way. It usually hides inside tiny victories, so ordinary that you almost miss them. One new sentence. One brave smile. One conversation that lasts 30 seconds longer than the one before. That was exactly how Sophia's next chapter began. It started with a little girl sitting alone in a school cafeteria and ended with something far more powerful than learning English. It ended with someone discovering that confidence grows faster when it is shared. Emma came home from school that Friday afternoon quieter than usual. Normally, she bursts through the front door talking about playground games, funny teachers, and the latest art projects. This time, she carefully placed her backpack on the floor and looked at her mother. "Mom," she said softly, "there's a new girl in my class." Sophia smiled. "That's nice." Emma slowly shook her head. "She doesn't smile. She eats lunch alone." Sophia immediately understood that feeling. She remembered standing alone at the bus stop on her first morning in America, wondering if anyone would speak to her. She remembered feeling invisible inside crowded places where everyone else seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Without saying anything, she sat beside Emma at the kitchen table. "What's her name?" Emma looked down for a moment. "Amina." "Where is she from?" "I think her family just moved here too." Sophia became very quiet. She looked toward the living room window where the afternoon sunlight filled the apartment with a peaceful glow. "Maybe," she whispered, "she feels like I felt." The following Monday, the school invited parents to a small welcome event for new families. Sophia almost decided not to go. She still worried about speaking English in front of strangers. What if she forgot words? What if nobody understood her? Those old fears had become much smaller over the past few weeks, but they had not completely disappeared. Fear has a funny habit of quietly returning whenever we step into unfamiliar situations. Before leaving the apartment, Miguel gently squeezed her hand. "Remember your first bus ride?" Sophia laughed. "I was terrified. And now?" She smiled. "Still a little terrified."
Miguel grinned.
"Good. That means you're growing." Psychologists often explain that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is choosing to move forward even while fear quietly walks beside you. Sophia took a deep breath, picked up a homemade plate of cookies Emily had helped her bake the night before, and headed toward the school. The cafeteria buzzed with conversations. Parents introduced themselves. Teachers welcomed new students. Children laughed while showing each other classrooms and colorful artwork hanging on the walls. Sophia noticed a woman standing alone near the window. Beside her stood a young girl with nervous eyes. Emma immediately whispered, "That's Amina." Sophia hesitated for only a second before walking over. "Hello," she said gently. "My name is Sophia." The woman smiled with visible relief. "Hello.
I'm Layla.
Their conversation began slowly. Both women searched for simple English words. Both apologized for their mistakes. Both laughed every time they accidentally used the wrong verb. Surprisingly, those little mistakes made the conversation feel even warmer. There was no pressure to sound perfect. They simply wanted to understand each other. Research on language acquisition consistently shows that meaningful communication builds confidence far more effectively than perfection. The goal of language is connection, not flawless grammar. Watching Sophia speak, I realized she was no longer translating every sentence inside her head before saying it aloud. She was beginning to think in simple English naturally. Emma invited Amina to sit with her during lunch. My daughter and son happened to be volunteering at the event, helping younger children find activities. Within minutes, 4 kids were laughing together over a simple card game. No one discussed accents. No one cared who had arrived first or who spoke better English. They only cared about having fun. Adults often complicate what children make beautifully simple. Later that afternoon, the school principal thanked Sophia for welcoming another new family. Sophia looked surprised. "I only talked." The principal smiled warmly. Sometimes talking is exactly what people need. Those words stayed with her all day. On the drive home, she looked out the window at neighborhoods that no longer felt unfamiliar. The grocery store where she had once been afraid to ask for help now felt normal. The coffee shop where she had practiced ordering her first drink had become part of her weekly routine. Even the bus stop where we first met no longer represented fear. It represented possibility. When we arrived home, Emily had already prepared dinner. As everyone gathered around the table, Sophia quietly shared what had happened at school. Emily smiled proudly. "I told you one day you'd help someone else." Sophia laughed. "I didn't believe you." I raised my glass of iced tea. "To small wins." Everyone lifted their glasses. Emma added with a grin. "Small wins become big stories." We all laughed, but deep inside I knew she was right. Scientists who study habit formation often explain that consistent small actions reshape the brain more effectively than occasional dramatic efforts. Learning English works exactly the same way. One conversation today becomes confidence tomorrow. One new friend today becomes a community next year. One kind sentence today may change another person's entire future. As the evening came to an end, Sophia checked her phone and smiled. There was a message from Layla thanking her for making their first school day feel less lonely. Sophia looked at me quietly. "I understand now." "Understand what?" I asked. She smiled with calm confidence that had not existed just weeks earlier.
Someone help me begin.
Today, I helped someone else begin. None of us realized that this simple message would soon inspire something much bigger than a friendship between two families. Within a few weeks, our neighborhood community center would ask Sophia to volunteer as a conversation partner for newly arrived immigrants, placing her in front of dozens of nervous newcomers who needed exactly what she had once needed herself: a patient smile, slow English, and someone willing to believe in them before they believed in themselves. Family around one table. Have you ever noticed that the most unforgettable conversations rarely happen during important meetings? They happen around an ordinary dinner table. Someone passes the bread. Someone laughs too loudly. Someone tells a story that begins with, "You'll never believe what happened today." Before long, strangers begin feeling like relatives. And people who once worried about speaking a single English sentence suddenly forget they are practicing at all. That was exactly what happened a few weeks after Sophia became a volunteer conversation partner at our neighborhood community center. None of us expected one simple dinner to become the evening that proved family is not always something you are born into. Sometimes it is something you slowly build, one meal, one story, and one act of kindness at a time. Emily had the idea first. "Why don't we invite everyone?" she asked while writing a grocery list on the kitchen counter. "Everyone." I smiled. "Everyone," she repeated. Sophia, Miguel, Emma, Layla, Amina, and a few of the new families from the community center. By Saturday afternoon, our backyard looked more like a neighborhood celebration than an ordinary family dinner. Folding tables stretched across the lawn. Children chased each other between trees while colorful balloons danced gently in the warm summer breeze. Someone played soft acoustic music through a small speaker. The smell of grilled chicken, fresh vegetables, homemade bread, roasted corn, and apple pie floated through the air. It felt like one of those peaceful American evenings that people remember years later without even realizing why. Guests began arriving one after another. Some had lived in the United States for decades. Others had arrived only weeks earlier. Different languages filled the backyard before slowly blending into simple English conversations. Nobody seemed embarrassed by their accent. Nobody apologized for speaking slowly. They simply wanted to connect. Sophia greeted every new family with the same warm smile she had once received from us. "Welcome," she said. "I'm glad you're here." Those 4 words sounded completely natural now. It was hard to believe this was the same woman who had once been afraid to say, "Good morning" to a bus driver. Confidence had not arrived overnight. It had quietly grown through hundreds of tiny conversations that slowly changed the way she saw herself. Researchers studying positive psychology often explain that confidence is built through repeated experiences of success rather than one dramatic breakthrough. Looking around the backyard, I realized every conversation happening there represented another small success. Emma and Amina quickly gathered the younger children for a game of soccer. My son volunteered to be referee, although he admitted after about 5 minutes that nobody was actually following the rules. Everyone laughed anyway. Sometimes happiness is wonderfully disorganized. As the adults filled their plates, conversations naturally turned toward life in America. One man admitted he still became confused every time he visited a large supermarket. "There are too many breakfast cereals," he joked. "I came for 1 box and left with 3 because I couldn't decide."
Miguel laughed loudly.
"Wait until you buy peanut butter. Then you'll really understand American choices." Even Emily joined the conversation. "Honestly, I think half of us are still confused by grocery stores." The table erupted with laughter. Shared humor has an amazing way of reminding people that nobody has everything figured out. Even those who appear confident are still learning every day. During dinner, Layla stood up holding a glass of lemonade. She looked slightly nervous. "Can I say something?" Everyone turned toward her. She took a slow breath before speaking in careful English. "When my family arrived, we knew nobody. We felt invisible." She smiled toward Sophia. Then one person said, "Welcome." That one word changed our first week. Sophia looked down shyly, while everyone applauded. Layla continued, "Kindness is easier to understand than perfect grammar." The backyard became completely quiet for a few seconds. Nobody wanted to interrupt such an honest moment. Scientists who study human connection have found that belonging is one of our deepest psychological needs. Feeling accepted reduces stress, improves learning, and even strengthens emotional resilience. Listening to Layla speak, I realized we were watching those scientific ideas come alive through ordinary people simply sharing a meal together. After dinner, the children gathered around a small fire pit to roast marshmallows. Emma accidentally burned hers until it turned completely black. She stared at it dramatically before announcing, "I invented charcoal candy." Everyone burst into laughter, including Miguel, who laughed so hard he nearly dropped his own marshmallow into the fire. The children quickly decided burnt marshmallows deserved a second chance. Somehow that became the unofficial theme of the evening.
Second chance.
New beginnings. Learning without fear. As darkness slowly settled across the neighborhood, tiny lights hanging above the backyard switched on, creating a warm golden glow. Sophia walked over and stood beside me quietly. "Do you remember the bus stop?" she asked. "Of course." She smiled. "That morning, I thought America was too big." She looked around at the laughing families filling our backyard. "Now, it feels smaller." I nodded. "Not because the country changed." She smiled knowingly. "Because the people changed."
"No." I replied gently.
"Because you found your people." She stood silently for a moment before whispering, "Maybe everyone needs one table like this." Her words stayed with me long after the evening ended. They reminded me that language lessons are never only about vocabulary. They are about creating places where people feel safe enough to speak, laugh, ask questions, and make mistakes without fear of judgment. As our guests began saying goodbye, the director of the community center quietly approached Sophia with an unexpected invitation. "Would you consider leading one of our beginner English conversation groups next month?" Sophia froze for a second. Just months earlier, she had been terrified to introduce herself in English. Now someone wanted her to teach through conversation. She looked at me with wide eyes, then smiled uncertainly. None of us knew it yet. But the answer she would give the following morning would inspire dozens of newcomers to believe that their own story in America was only beginning, and that even the smallest voice could one day become someone else's greatest source of hope. The beginning of confidence. There is a quiet moment that almost nobody notices when learning a new language.
It is not the first word you understand. It is not the first sentence you speak.
It is the first time another person looks at you for help instead of seeing you as the one who needs help. That invisible line changes everything. Confidence is no longer something you borrow from kind strangers. It becomes something you carry inside yourself. On the morning Sophia was invited to lead her first beginner English conversation group at the community center, she stood in front of her bedroom mirror, holding a notebook full of simple phrases. She practiced each sentence slowly. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sophia. Please don't worry about mistakes. She smiled after saying the last sentence because she realized she was speaking to herself just as much as to the future students. Miguel walked past the bedroom door carrying his coffee mug before another hospital shift. He smiled. You're rehearsing? Sophia laughed nervously. I feel like my first day of school. Miguel gently kissed her forehead. That's because today you're not starting a new chapter. He paused for a second. You're helping other people start theirs. Those words stayed with her during the entire drive to the community center. When we arrived together, the classroom was already filling with newcomers from different parts of the world. Some carried notebooks. Others carried translation apps on their phones. A few simply carried the same nervous expression Sophia had worn on the day we first met beside the city bus stop. Looking around the room felt like looking back in time. There were about 15 people altogether. A retired engineer, a young couple expecting their first baby, a university student, a father hoping to find construction work, a grandmother who wanted to speak with her future neighbors. Every face held a different dream, but every pair of eyes shared one common question. Will I be good enough? Modern educational research consistently shows that adults often learn languages more slowly than children, not because their brains are weaker, but because they are far more afraid of embarrassment. Fear interrupts learning long before grammar ever does. Sophia knew that feeling better than anyone. She walked to the front of the room, took one slow breath, and smiled.
Good morning, she said.
My name is Sophia.
Her voice was calm.
Today, we learned together. Nobody corrected her simple grammar. Nobody expected a perfect speech. Instead, several people smiled with visible relief. The room suddenly felt lighter. First rule, Sophia continued. Mistakes are welcome here. A few students laughed quietly. Second rule. She pointed toward her own chest. Speak slowly. Then she pointed toward everyone else. Listen kindly. The room became completely silent before breaking into warm applause. I sat quietly in the back, watching everything unfold. I could hardly believe this confident woman was the same person who once whispered good morning to a bus driver because she was afraid of saying it too loudly. Transformation rarely announces itself. It simply appears one ordinary day wearing comfortable shoes and carrying a notebook. The lesson itself was beautifully simple. Sophia asked everyone to introduce themselves using only 3 short sentences. My name is. I live in. I like. One by one, people stood up. Their voices trembled. They searched for words. Sometimes they laughed at themselves. Sometimes they forgot simple vocabulary. Every time someone struggled, Sophia smiled and patiently waited instead of finishing the sentence for them. Educational psychologists often describe this as creating psychological safety, an environment where people learn faster because they know mistakes will not be punished. Halfway through the session, an older man named Carlos stood up. He looked embarrassed before speaking. My English. He stopped. Very bad. Sophia immediately smiled.
No.
She gently shook her head. You're English. She pointed toward him encouragingly.
Growing.
Carlos laughed. Growing. The entire room repeated the word together. Growing. It became the unofficial word of the day. Growing confidence. Growing friendships. Growing dreams. During the break, a young woman quietly approached Sophia. Can I ask something? Sophia nodded. Of course. How long did it take before you stopped feeling afraid? Sophia thought carefully before answering. Maybe. She smiled. I never stopped feeling afraid. The woman looked surprised. Sophia continued softly. I just stopped letting fear make my decisions. The young woman's eyes filled with tears. I needed to hear that. Science tells us that courage is strengthened through repeated action. Every time we act despite fear, the brain slowly reduces its emotional alarm response. In simple words, bravery grows through practice, just like English does. When the class ended, nobody rushed toward the exit. Small groups stayed behind talking with one another in slow, careful English. Phone numbers were exchanged. Study partners were formed. Laughter filled the room. Something much bigger than a language lesson had happened. A community had quietly begun. As everyone prepared to leave, the director of the community center walked over carrying a folder. Sophia, she said with a proud smile, we've never had so many positive comments after a first class. Sophia looked genuinely surprised. Really? The director nodded. People said they finally felt safe enough to speak. Sophia stood silently for a moment before turning toward me. Do you remember what you told me at the bus stop? I smiled. Which part? She laughed softly. You said I didn't need perfect English. I nodded. You needed courage. Sophia smiled with quiet confidence. Now I understand. As we walked outside into the warm afternoon sunshine, she looked at families passing through the neighborhood, children riding bicycles, neighbors waving from front porches, and buses stopping where strangers climbed aboard every few minutes. The city no longer felt overwhelming. It felt familiar. Yet the most meaningful surprise of all was still waiting. Later that evening, someone would knock on Sophia's front door carrying nothing more than a handwritten thank you letter. But the words inside would prove that the simple decision to help one frightened immigrant on an ordinary morning had quietly become the beginning of dozens of new stories, including one that might soon belong to someone watching this very video. Your story starts today. Imagine opening your front door on an ordinary evening and discovering that someone has traveled across town just to say two simple words. Thank you. Not because you gave them money, not because you solved every problem in their life, but because you listened, because you smiled, because you slowed down long enough to make them believe they belonged. That is exactly how the story ended, or perhaps how it truly began. And if you have stayed with me until this moment, practicing your English one sentence at a time, I want you to know something important. You're no longer just listening to a story. You're becoming part of it. That evening, just after dinner, our doorbell rang. Emily looked at me curiously. Are we expecting someone? I shook my head. When I opened the door, Sophia was standing there beside Emma, both smiling in a way I had never seen before. Sophia held a small white envelope. Emma held a bouquet of sunflowers wrapped in simple brown paper. These are for your family, Emma said proudly. Emily welcomed them inside while the children immediately disappeared into the living room to continue an unfinished board game from the weekend. Before, some friendships become so natural that nobody remembers exactly when they stopped feeling new. Sophia handed me the envelope. Please read it, she said quietly. Inside was a handwritten letter from Carlos, the older gentleman who had attended her first English conversation class. His handwriting was careful and uneven, but every sentence carried unmistakable honesty. Dear Sophia, the letter began. Before your class, I believed I was too old to learn English. I stayed quiet because I thought people would laugh at me. Yesterday, I ordered breakfast by myself for the first time. Today, I introduced myself to my neighbor. Tomorrow, I will apply for a volunteer position at my local library. Thank you for teaching me that mistakes are not proof of failure.
They are proof that I am still growing.
I read the final sentence twice before looking up. Sophia smiled gently. He wrote every word himself. Emily quietly wiped away a tear. That's beautiful. Sophia shook her head.
No.
She smiled toward me. It started before me. For a moment, nobody spoke. We all remembered the cold morning at the bus stop. One stranger. One smile. One conversation. One decision not to keep walking. Researchers studying kindness often describe something called the ripple effect. One generous action encourages another, which inspires another, creating a chain of positive behavior that spreads far beyond the original moment. Looking around our living room, I realized we were no longer discussing a scientific theory. We were living inside it. A few weeks later, the community center organized a celebration for families who had recently arrived in America. Sophia was invited to give a short welcome speech. This time, she did not carry a notebook. She did not rehearse every sentence. She simply stood in front of dozens of newcomers and spoke from her heart in slow, clear English. When I came here, she began, I believed I needed perfect English before I could belong. She smiled warmly. I was wrong. The room became completely silent. I learned something better. She paused. Belonging begins when someone says, welcome. Many people nodded quietly. Some smiled. Others wiped away tears that looked very familiar. They were the same tears Sophia had cried months earlier. Tears of relief. Tears that appear when fear finally begins to lose its voice. She continued. Do not wait until your English is perfect before making friends. Speak today.
Smile today.
Ask questions today. Every conversation is one step forward. Educational research supports exactly that idea. Consistent, low-pressure conversations strengthen language retention, increase speaking confidence, and reduce communication anxiety far more effectively than waiting for perfection. In other words, real life is one of the greatest classrooms you will ever find. After the applause ended, families gathered together for coffee, cookies, and conversation. Children laughed while teaching each other playground games. Parents exchanged phone numbers. Volunteers answered questions about schools, jobs, libraries, and local events. Nobody rushed home. Nobody wanted the afternoon to end. Emma walked over holding the same purple crayon the little girl had given Sophia months earlier inside the immigration office. She had kept it all this time. Mom, she asked, can we give this to someone new? Sophia smiled with tears in her eyes.
Yes.
Together they walked toward a young boy sitting quietly beside his mother. Emma placed the purple crayon into his hand and smiled. Welcome. The boy smiled back. No long speech.
No complicated vocabulary.
Just one word. Welcome. At that moment, I realized the story had come full circle. Kindness had found its way back to where it started. Only now it was traveling through new hands, new voices, and new hearts. That is how hope survives. It keeps moving. Maybe you are watching this video because you want to improve your English. Maybe you feel nervous every time you speak. Maybe you worry that your accent is too strong or your vocabulary is too small. If that sounds familiar, remember Sophia's journey. She did not become confident because she stopped making mistakes. She became confident because she stopped letting mistakes stop her. Every simple sentence you practice today is a gift to your future self. Every conversation, no matter how short, is another brick in the bridge connecting you to new friendships, new opportunities, and perhaps even a new life. And one day, without realizing it, you may become the person who smiles at a stranger standing alone at a bus stop, wondering if anyone will speak first. Perhaps your story will become someone else's beginning, just as Sophia's became Carlos's, Layla's, Amina's, Emma's, and so many others. So keep listening, keep reading,
Keep speaking.
slowly, patiently. Courage grows one sentence at a time, and sometimes the smallest words create the biggest miracles. That is all for today. I will make many more videos like this in the future. Please subscribe so you don't miss the next story.